this opportunity because of tax incentives in many of these states. There were many movies I was to shoot in New York City. Didn't shoot in New York City because it was cheaper to go to Canada. Tax incentives were given in Canada, so we shot many of the movies in Canada. One in particular, Moonstruck. There were 2 weeks that we shot in New York City, only exteriors, and then the remaining shoot, we went to Canada for tax incentives. And that's what we did. There was a movie called 29th Street, which began in New York City. We did 2 weeks of exteriors in New York City, completed the movie in Durham, North Carolina, another tax incentive state. Just recently, I had the pleasure of working in Boston, Massachusetts. We will commence a motion picture called Stiffs in November of last year. We were going to another state. We were persuaded to delay the beginning of this movie until January of this year. The reason we were persuaded to do that was that the new tax law went into effect in Massachusetts, in Boston. We saved on a $3.5 million movie over $500,000 in tax credits. It made it very feasible and possible for us to shoot in Boston and very attractive. And may I add, there are many movies that are not shot in Boston that should shoot in Boston. There are movies that are shot in other states, and those states are made to look like Boston in certain areas, only because there are tax incentives given. So if you decide individually and collectively to give tax credits to this industry, it'll be probably one of the greatest things you would have done, because there is no better industry, in my opinion, to create wealth than the motion picture industry. We speak of skilled labor from Connecticut that will work in these edifices, so to speak. But think of those who are entry-level labor as well. We're talking about, at Utopia Studios, we're talking about thousands and thousands of jobs. Of course, we're all happy when we have skilled labor working, but we also have entry-level workers as well that will benefit from this. The economy in the state will leap to areas it's never been before, I'm quite sure. It's been done before in other states that have given this incentive to motion picture people. Hollywood is a funny animal. They'll only move when they can make money, and that is all they'll do. They'll move. They state that it's a very liberal sort of community. Unfortunately, much of the work in California is outsourced to different places outside of our country. That saddens the hell out of me, but it's done, and it's done frequently. Please make Connecticut what it deserves to be. A place where a movie can be seen by its people. There's nothing more attractive. Let me say this. When I was a little boy in New York City, I was born on West 68th Street, and I would see a movie being shot on the street. It was the most exciting thing that I had seen in my life. So I don't want you to think it's going to upset traffic. It's going to drive you nuts. It will to a certain degree. But there is nothing more great, in my opinion, greater than for the youth of Connecticut to see movies being made, actors walking around. I mean, most of us are garbage, but there are some of us that are quite good. You know, and I hate to use myself as an example, but children look at it, grown-ups look at it. You walk down the street, you see a movie being shot in your community. There's nothing like it. And let's look at the economics of that movie being shot in your community. Your grocery store will make more money. Your camera store will make more money. Your restaurants will be busting at its seams. And not only for customers coming in to eat or do whatever it is they do in that particular store, but we might even use one of those places as a location. And to ask that person to close down his or her establishment for that moment or for that day in question, they will be rewarded handsomely as a result. So I am telling you, it is the most exciting thing. I tried to do this in New York City, Stapleton Studios in Staten Island. I tried for 3 years. Let me tell you, I did it for altruistic reasons. There was no money being made by me. I just thought it was something that could benefit that particular county of Staten Island in New York. We fought like heck. Giuliani sent me in there to do it. I said, this should be a studio. Unfortunately, Bloomberg didn't think so, and EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, didn't think so yet. It hasn't been, we haven't failed yet. It's still in litigation, it's in federal court, and we're trying to get this thing done. And I am telling you, in Connecticut, do not allow anyone to stop this from happening. Speaking to you people here, you wonderful people, I get it individually and collectively, you all seem to be for it. Am I wrong? You really, honestly seem to be for it. And let me say this in finality, that all of you possibly can be extras, and you can be upgraded to a speaking part. That's a day player, you get a lot more money. Let me say I'm so pleased to be here. Let me say I'm so pleased to be here in spite of this terrible drive that I had from Jersey all the way out. The traffic was terrible.
I'm sorry.
But I just enjoyed coming. It's my first time in the Connecticut Capitol. It is quite beautiful. And I thank you all for allowing us to speak here on behalf of Utopia Studios. And I do hope you vote in the manner in which I truly feel you will, that the incentive is a tax incentive for this particular state, and doing that, you will economically lift this state to another level that it hasn't been before. I thank you so much.
I love you guys. You know, it's that's what I'm used to, what we're used to. We call each other up and listen, we have this to do, I have this part, I have this script, I have that script, and we all show up for each other. And that's why when we started proposing this and putting this together, Joe and myself, and Joe actually was listening to, I had my friends over and we were in LA and we were all complaining that, you know, sick and tired of being in LA and want to go home, I want to go home. And he's like, well, why don't you guys just do something about it? And we just all gave him a dirty look, as usual. But he said, do something about it, and that's how Utopia came about. But it's about calling up your friends and doing something, and so we wanted giving back as the School of the Arts. But as I was calling up my friends who would come up today to, you know, to speak on behalf of the tax incentives, so many of my friends, they were like, oh, God, Kathy, I can't come up there today, but yeah, oh, sure. You know, if they gave a tax incentive, I'd be there. And yeah, I want your money from Utopia, too. I have this great movie I want to make up there. But I can't. It's funny, when you listen, not one of us have come to Connecticut to make a movie. I've never made a movie here. I've never done anything up here. And I was talking to Ed Burns from Saving Private Ryan, Brothers McMullen. He does all these wonderful family independent movies. He's like, yeah, Connecticut gives tax incentives. I'm there on Utopia's money. I want to come up to Connecticut and make movies. I was going to George Hamilton, since his love to, by the way. I would love to come to Connecticut, Kathy. I can't wait. Dashing George. So many people who would love to come up to Connecticut, all of our colleagues and our friends, and they all send their regards. And anybody who's going to read the letter? Anybody? From you are? Okay, great. From Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. I mean, it's just, everybody has lent their support and would love to come up here, and I just think it's just so wonderful, you know, that everybody would like to come back home. So, yay for tax incentives. That's about it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It wasn't that bad. It was
and in the comments that you have all made, really in reference to the tax benefit issue, the revenue growth for the state of Connecticut, the economic quality that it's going to have, job growth, not to mention the fact, as you've all stated, the making of a movie here, the post-production benefits, the ability to be able to use the expertise that's within a 50-mile or 75-mile radius of this building right here, and to be the ability to be able to do that right here in the state of Connecticut, create those jobs, create that revenue, make it easier for the people that do that work to do it in the state of Connecticut. So, with all that said, again, thank you for your comments and your testimony. And just one other comment I want to direct towards Danny. Probably, and I like a lot of your pictures, Dan, but probably the best picture I like of Broadway's Danny Rose is Nick Apollo was in that. He's a Waterbury guy. But, if it weren't for that indiscretion on the Johnny Carson show, he might have been,
Well, let me say this, Broadway Danny Rose, I was supposed to get, but Apollo got it. A Connecticut guy beat me out, I want you to know that. A non-actor, from what I understand, yeah.
But thank you again for taking the trip up, and I appreciate that. Senator?
Thank you for coming today. Thank you for your testimony. I think you added a lot. By being here, you brought a lot of attention to this. I think that can help us move this right along. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Boucher?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Aiello, allow me for a second just to make a brief comment to you. You talked about filming in the local community. I live in Waterbury, Connecticut, about 20 miles southwest. And a few years ago, there was a movie being filmed in my community, Stanley and Iris, and Robert De Niro. And it was unbelievable how the community rallied together, and they had so many extras that they hired from the local community kids.
Yes.
And every now and then we just watch the movie and see the kids that we knew at the time was like, 4 or 5 years old, just riding a bicycle down the street. Now he is a manager of a local car rental place. So it's just very, very exciting, and you are correct, I agree with you. It added a lot to the community insofar as economic benefits, restaurants at the time, and catering services, and trucking rentals, they rented trucks, and so it really worked out very well for the community, and believe me, I like that movie, and that's because it was filmed right in my neighborhood. So I really appreciate the comment on that.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Senator Cook?
Thank you. Happy, it's delightful to have you bring your friends here. We're happy to have you. My favorite was Forget Paris.
Oh,
You
goodness.
need to tell Billy Crystal that if you're going to make movies east of the Connecticut River, we're Red Sox fans.
I'll mention it.
Representative Vial?
Thank you, John. Thank you for welcoming me. Danny, I want to comment on your, you need to not comment on your career, but I live in West Coast Connecticut, and why did you start like and so on? One thing I want to say, I think everybody here saw the Godfather, professional. I come from Sicily. The scene where Al Pacino asked for the 3 miles from my house.
Is that right?
It's in the town of Salomon, and nobody heard the town. After we always pick up my Swedish production. People cross my over, go there, take a picture, look up at the restaurant. And I see the movie once in a while, and I said, you'll be there. And I said, yeah, no, that's the old lady, it's a young lady, about 89, and she owns, it's actually a coffee shop. Coffee shop, and then you buy an ice. It's the best thing I've ever said.
Wow.
That's to say, the people today, and those days, people there, the chance to move in Connecticut, because there is bases, there are so many bases. You have a Diamondback or race cars, Gillette cars, people remember this is what they'll come in. And, it's a part of that. And I'm sorry if you're working in Italy. I think you're working here.
No, that was me who came working in Italy. And by the way, we shot Sicily for New York and Montreal for New York on several films. It's amazing what they can do.
If you ever had to work in Italy, give me a call.
Representative
I'm all
Mioli,
yours.
I did 5 movies in Cinecittà, in Rome.
Cinecittà.
Yeah.
I saw the Minister of Cultural Sense, they call it, very good club, because of the movies and so on.
Right.
It comes from a town about 3 miles from my town. 3 hours one. My town is West Coast. America. My roots is there. I was born in Rotterdam.
Joe is going to be inviting you all over to his office, cappuccino.
A good Italian cappuccino?
Only Michelle in Connecticut.
Representative
Grazie.
for a brief comment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You would never know, Mr. Aiello, that you and I have something very much in common.
Are you next?
When you said, I've always been an actress, when you said that you grew up on 68th Street, 217 West 68th Street is where I grew up, in Manhattan, right
I
between
can't-
Amsterdam Avenue and
I was
West
born
End
at
Avenue.
250 West 68th Street. I was born, not in a hospital, I was dropped on a bed. I was the only one. All the other kids in the house were in the hospital, but I was in bed.
PS 94.
Oh, my God. in heaven.
Corner, and you and I may have been members of the same neighborhood gang.
Oh, just, thank you. Wow, this is rare. This is rare. I can't believe it. It's- Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that.
For a brief comment, Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, and more directly to what you said, Mr. Perlman, and I think all of you can hit it on it a little bit, is the outsourcing. And, you know, that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and you're absolutely right. We're outsourcing our talented individuals like yourself all over this globe. And, you know, you mentioned some of the skilled trades that have gone there, gone overseas and everywhere else with the tax incentives, and you're absolutely right. I'm a firm supporter of this project prior to, but when you said that, I just sat back and thought about it a little bit more. You're absolutely right. We have to do something that will get folks out here in the country.
Thanks. You know, my obsession with Connecticut began with Joe's obsession with Connecticut and his dream to build Utopia Studios here. And over the course of time, you know, you put on a coat and, you know, eventually it becomes your favorite coat. And so I'm developing a rather well-articulated love affair with the state and looking into spending a great deal of time here. And I have been educating Bulgarians, Africans, you know, Eastern Europeans, Western Europeans, South Americans, and one of the things that really, really impresses me about the ergonomic idea of what we're doing here today, what Joe began doing with the Dream of Utopia, is the amount of sort of cross-pollination of giving, taking, growing. And Kathy mentioned this briefly, but one of the most impressive things about the Utopia Dream is the School for the Arts. Because when you go to Bulgaria to shoot a movie, you hire 80% of your crew are Bulgarian. Why? Because, you know, they'll work for $2 a day. You know, why not, in the dream of having a new artistic community where everything is attractive, where you have these kids who are local kids who are getting an opportunity to be educated in what I consider to be an incredibly noble industry, an art form, which has a deep, rich heritage in the United States, and give them hands-on
Experience.
opportunities to work with those of us who, you know, are the generation ahead, who have some things to show them, and then they take the reins and be the next generation. That to me is so appealing, and there's such a nobility to that. And you know, we have an opportunity to just enhance and enhance and enhance and make this entire thing that has all of this real good, you know, good-hearted sentiment attached to its dream. You know, something that's vital and viable and really, really works for the benefit of everybody.
Again, thank you, Representative. For final comment, the co-chair of the Finance Revenue and Bonding Committee, my friend in the House, Representative Cam Stables, for concluding comment.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair? Is that possible?
Yes, through chair.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here too, and I think you're sensing on this committee and I think in the legislature a real interest in attracting not just movie making but the film industry in Connecticut. And if I could just ask that question, and if it's, I know there's a lot to be said about it, but
answer that, but Representative, we do have next up the tax attorney, investment tax attorney. Is that right?
Representative, in my travels making movies in Eastern Europe, I ran into an expert in worldwide media finance, and they've been gracious enough to come today. I think they're the next speakers that are up, Bianca Bezdek and Warren Goss, and they can address the impact that smart finance as a basis for making media plays on a community, and with real live examples of how it's impacted states, how it's impacted countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if we could defer to them.
I'd be happy to wait. Thank you.
Again, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah?
Next up is Bianca Bezdek and Warren Goss.
I hope so.
No, I do not. Hello, good day. My name is Bianca Bezdek. I would too. We're no fun. The cameras are turned off. Just moving. Got me low.
Thank you, Bianca. Can you close the doors to the background, please?
It's my pleasure. Hello, everyone. My name is Bianca Bezdek. I am an entertainment attorney. I'm a New York attorney as well as an EU attorney. I specialize in film finance and structuring film funds. Ron Perlman and I actually have a history together because we met in the Czech Republic, since a lot of Runaway Productions ran there. Let me take a step back and introduce the company I'm affiliated with, Global Media Capital. I'm a partner in that company along with Warren Goss, as well as being a partner in a law firm called Bezdek, Goss and McMichael. Throughout my career, I have been brought, originally from New York, I was brought to Europe because that's where the industry went. On behalf of the Hollywood studios such as Paramount, New Line, and Universal, I have structured the investment of over 2.2 billion euro into films and film funds like the Harry Potter series, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Lara Croft 1 and 2, Paycheck, Marcy X, The Fighting Temptations, the Malibu's Most Wanted. I could rack off another 20, but I think you understand my point. Very large and medium-sized films went to Germany because of a very aggressive tax incentive. And I can give you 2 case studies of my experience and testify to the fact that Germany was a success because of its tax opportunities, its tax incentives, and investments into the films I've mentioned occurred there. The Czech Republic was favored by a lot of producers and filmmakers because the production values were very high. The labor rules were very weak, and of course the location was stunning. It had a lot of new, large production facilities and post-production facilities, studios, and over the course of a decade, although films like Mission Impossible were filmed there, and Shanghai Nights, and The Bourne Identity, among many others, because there were no tax incentives, for which I lobbied, unsuccessfully, unfortunately, no tax incentives were put into place. You've seen that a lot of productions have gone further east, particularly to Romania, to Bulgaria, to Macedonia, etc. And of course, here's the dichotomy. Germany did have that tax incentive, which was clearly a benefit, and the Czech Republic did not. Among some other things that I advised on were investments under the Euro Convention on Cinematic Co-Production, bilateral and multilateral co-production treaties, and I was focusing on that Central and Eastern European region and Germany until a federal act was put into place, Section 181 of the Jobs Creation Act, which of course brought my focus back to the States. So I got to run back home. It's a very particular time right now for the United States in trying to repatriate its runaway production. It's important, I urge, on a state level, that state-level tax incentives are put into place on the tail of what just occurred on the federal level. What our company, Global Media Capital, does is filmmakers around the country or around the world come to us and ask us to please, can you structure the budget? Help us, assist us in the structuring of covering as much of our budgetary items and needs as we can. We have talent attached, we have certain locations in mind that the intellectual property lends itself to. However, we don't really know how to monetize certain tax credits or other tax incentives. We don't really understand that much about them. So what we do is, with the assumption that there is a seamless integration, that the intellectual property lends itself to a handful of locations, we advise you can get back to up to 20% of your budget by keeping, or 30% of your budget by keeping the production in the United States, so long as it falls within the confines of what a qualified production is under 181. And then we take a step further and we say, we recommend that you go to this state or that state because these credits are fully transferable. They're useful to you. These credits are monetizable. They're useful to you. And after making an assessment, that's really what we, for the filmmaker, we funnel them to the location because that is what is the determining factor between making a movie or not making a movie sometimes. Talent has a window of opportunity, and if the budget is not in place through traditional investment means, then it's the soft funding that makes all the difference.
Hi. I wanted to talk about also some specifics in your legislation, your proposed legislation that I've seen, and Bianca's right in what she says. We direct productions to specific states. Right now we have 181 that incentivizes the United States, so we can get productions now from Canada, Hungary, and other places around the world back to the U.S. Now the trick is for us to find which state to put these productions into. And there we break down who has the best incentives. And looking at your proposed legislation, 30% credit and the transferability of that credit is key. That can get us large portions of the budget. Being in Connecticut, great proximity to New York is also key. Having great studios, we can now refer. With this in place, we can now refer our productions to Connecticut. But two other points here on your, that we have to applaud you guys for leaving out in your proposals, in your proposed legislation is, number one, the lack of a cap and the lack of a sunset provision. What this allows us to do is really stabilize Connecticut as a state. we can say unequivocally, come to Connecticut, you don't have to worry about caps being the first there or so on. Everybody, take your productions really blindly, we can say this, to a place like Utopia where you will have a 30% tax credit. You can finance a large portion of your budget there. You don't have to worry about first come, first serve with a cap. And you don't have to worry about delays in the budget, delays in your shooting and so on, because there won't be a sunset. So we'd like to applaud you for that. And I think with the framework that you have in place, what we do in our business, we can safely say that we can bring a lot of productions over to Connecticut. In the last month, I've redirected a couple of projects. Number one to Massachusetts, a Marissa Tomei project who's attached, and I've also directed a Lisa Kudrow project to Louisiana. These are projects that were slated to be in Connecticut, to be filmed in Connecticut and Hungary respectively. Both of those projects are projects that I could have, if we had Utopia in place and the tax framework that you have established, I could have referred those both to Connecticut, and when it's in place, that's what we would intend, that's what we would do.
I wanted to raise one other point, the wage tax credit provision. I wanted to, again, commend the decision makers on incorporating that provision. I do agree that it is central to incentivizing local jobs, local talent, and cultivating a local industry. It will, in my experience, I've seen provisions as such change a location industry to a local industry. And there were points raised as to how exactly that could be done. That is a means of keeping the industry homegrown and expanding it. And then you find that the trickle-down benefit to that is it does build and strengthen the greater infrastructure.
Well, I think it's also setting up, the last point we should touch on is the setting up of the, of your film office, which I think is important for producers to be able to get on a website and then from there actually make a phone call into some live people who can answer questions. That's something that's important. And I think just going back to the lack of a cap and the lack of a sunset, what's going to happen is that within a few years, Connecticut, what happens is we're very specialized and we know where to direct people, but most producers just know generally where to go. Louisiana has a nice credit, another state has a nice credit. That's where you want to get Connecticut, to the point where you don't want to have a situation like Hawaii where people are up in the air and they're saying, okay, there's a cap. There are all sorts of, where producers go there and have an experience where they can't get what they thought they could get. You want to lure people in. They'll have great studios, and if they can get the percentages of their budget that they think, then blindly within a few years, everybody will just mention Connecticut in the same breath that they mention Louisiana. I think that's what your goal should be. I think with this proposed legislation, you're in a perfect spot if you adopt it in this form to do that.
I appreciate your testimony. I have many more questions than I would use today. I'll just ask one or two. But I can imagine you're in our situation where you see a lot of states that are doing this in New York City, and I read in the article today that California is looking at changing theirs to be competitive with New York. You can imagine there'll be many states that will be looking to continue to up the ante in terms of what they're offering.
I think the best tool will be job creation. Here you'll have a situation where you'll have, I mean, you're lucky to have something like Utopia where they're trying to be ambitious, and from there you can see that if you have your credit established, you'll have the productions come into those type of facilities, and you'll see from there job creation, and I think that's really the best way to measure what you're going to see. I think you'll also see the number of movies, the number of movies go into states and so on, into this state increase. I think that's another measurement that you'll see. But I think in Connecticut, job creation is going to be the key measurement.
Revenue out in terms of credits, and they're creating jobs and downstream revenue. I just have a hard time with job measurement. I'm not sure how you would measure that. How you would, if you want to create an ongoing industry as opposed to just jobs that come in for a week and go out, is there a way that you can think of where you could really track that and know that the money we're investing is producing something that will last?
Well, I mean, two things. I think one, what you're seeing is and 181 is also an example of when you have a tax like that, you're taking tax breaks from one hand and you're putting it into the hands of labor, of wages, of people who are really losing their job. So I think what you're seeing there is a transfer of wealth in a sense, and you'll see a job, you'll see a job creation. You'll see a job creation there. So when Louisiana says that, maybe they're not seeing revenue increase, what they are seeing is they're seeing jobs that ordinarily would not be in Louisiana come to Louisiana. And then the second thing is what I said before, was that once Connecticut becomes a place where blindly producers can say, we can get 30% or 25% of their budget, when you combine that, you'll get the jobs, and you'll get the inflows, and establish an industry in Connecticut, as opposed to just a passing picture or so on.
And also to add to that, what happened on the heels of the Louisiana tax implementation, the incentives, I deal with a lot of attorneys day to day. And I find a lot of attorneys I deal with exceedingly are spending less time or are not any longer based in New York or Los Angeles. They've actually relocated. So, for example, the wage tax credit, though it would provide a sort of preferential status for the individuals that are originally residents here, it will also, I think, help serve individuals that otherwise wouldn't live here, because it provides this lucrative status of residency. And so when you see individuals relocating for that basis, again, it has that multiplier effect of it'll spur the real estate industry. They have to live somewhere. It'll spur the local economy in terms of the day-to-day entertainment, restaurants, etc. And that's where you get a multiplier effect.
And that's a great point. I mean, you might not be able to see that in an individual study. Its causation is always hard to link in many different areas, statistically. But common sense dictates that when you have a place like Utopia that didn't exist before, and huge grounds or any of these other studios that didn't exist before, and the jobs are there, and the jobs that you create around them, studies sometimes don't pick that up. But you are creating an industry.
If you go onto a location, the pre-production time is several months. The production time can be several months in the post, depending on where along that production slate you are. If you spend 6 months, 9 months in a location, and you're backed up for your subsequent film in that location, there's a likelihood that the location, as attractive as Connecticut, will appeal to you. And that, again, will be the genesis of that flow-through effect I mentioned, originated by the wage tax credit.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a follow-up question to that. Senator LeBeau has a question. If you could also, at the end of the committee meeting, be available for Representative Staples, the co-chair of finance. You know, he might have some additional questions off committee for you in reference to this as we craft this package, incentive package moving forward. But for the benefit of our committee in terms of finance members that are here, if you could explain a little bit FTEs, full-time equivalent, and how they relate to the film industry as opposed to other industries, you know, in crafting this job generation. You know, I think that I know it's important in reference to follow-up Representative Staples.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these measurements, again, have proven in other states not to be as accurate as they purport to be. I think you have to stay in crafting this really on the ground level, and I think that dictates really going in the direction that you're going, and I think and taking over a period of time, seeing the job creation that's been promised. I mean, legislation can always be obviously retracted, but I think over time you're going to see the creation of an industry, and again, these are hard things to measure.
I look at the FTE, the full-time equivalent, and from information that I have, it seems that this is important when we look at the film or television production industry and how a film is produced and post-production of the film. And I have in some testimony here as an example of, and I believe that this is important information in creating what this committee wants to create, both here in Congress and Finance, establishing a base. 125 extras working for 2 days each, or 2 camera operators, each working for 6 months. Both count as a single FTE, a full-time equivalent. This is based on data from the U.S. Census Bureau. MPAA estimates that in 2002, the film production industry, and this is not even post-production, directly employed 353,076 people nationwide and paid them $21.2 billion collectively. And that's, again, for the purposes of this committee, is production, and now are even the numbers for post-production. So if you use this state, this committee, to grab a hold of that market and move forward. So thank you for your testimony, and hopefully it will be available for Representative Staples after Senator LeBeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to, you probably haven't seen this, but I've got testimony in front of me from the Office of Policy and Management of Generic Secretary. He was a very important voice in our state, very level-headed. And he was a former senator and working basically writes the budget in the state of Connecticut. And he said, just to put this out of context, I'm sure Bob will forgive me, but he said that this could be very expensive, worse, and simply reward activity that's already taking place in Connecticut without creating a single new job. I'd like to, I wanted to refer, looking at that, I also wanted to refer to the bill, because it seems clear to me that there would be new jobs. And when I read eligible, definition of eligible production costs, and skipping some that go into the holder of the intellectual property, is either a company authorized to do business in the state or an individual who is a resident of the state. And this is the important part. 75% of the qualified production on which the intellectual property is based is produced in the state. And development costs of the production tax credit derived therein are less than 35% of the actual cash expenditures which the budget allocated for the production of the qualified production is in the state. So my feeling is that there are some, I don't know if you've had a chance to actually read the bill, but there are some guidelines in the bill that will ensure that we are talking about new jobs and about an industry frankly that is not currently fit.
Absolutely. I mean, the testimony that says that, somebody said that, you might not create a job. I mean, I don't know what
Otherwise be here.
that would otherwise, I mean, that's just not true. I think, as I gave an example, I've pulled productions personally that were slated to be in Hungary or in Ireland to Massachusetts. And, to say that those jobs would have otherwise been in Massachusetts if not for their aggressive 25% credit is just untrue. And, just sitting there in our offices in New York and the amount of productions, when I leave here, I'll go back, I'll speak to a number of producers, and, we're going to direct them as part of their budget on where they should go. And as you heard from the actors who were here before, nobody's ever heard of Connecticut, but I guarantee you, when you implement this legislation, jobs and productions will go to Connecticut that would otherwise not be there for the legislation that you guys will enact.
And I'd like to add to that. I also find it somewhat incomprehensible that that could be accurate, that statement, because, to give you a specific example, daily, this is what we do. We deal with tens of producers that come to us for guidance where to begin their scouting based on what makes numbers and cents. There are productions every day that are scheduled to shoot in California that they would have contemplated to go to, or it was intended for the production to be in New Orleans because that's where the scenes were actually placed as it is written. And they thought, okay, well, everything there is destroyed after Katrina, the facilities aren't there. But when we explain to them, regardless, if you can possibly work around that, this is going to be your NPV benefit, the net benefit of your budget, then they turn right back around and they insist on shooting there. So, and these are jobs that wouldn't have been there, and this is the key issue, that when a producer rides the fence on whether or not to play something, this is always the determining factor. And we are those that translate how that works to the producers. So.
Thank you very much.
Being counters and the record. Representative Kalakevich, I believe, and then Representative Albert.
Thank you.
Just before you start, Representative, for the benefit of the people out here, we are going to extend somewhat beyond 12:30 to allow speakers that we still have on the public side to speak along with officials, public officials. Proceed.
Thank you. I just wanted to, good afternoon. I just wanted to ask the question following there. For example, when my state university president comes before my community and presents like an economic forecasting report, he tells us how many jobs that there are in the local community, and then he talks about the indirect benefit with respect to the purchasing and how many dollars students spend and how many dollars the faculty spends and how much the university spends in terms of contracts and things like that. I was wondering if we're all trying to get a handle on what the cost benefit would be. So if we, in a 12-month period, if the state of Connecticut gave out $50 million worth of tax credit, do you have a ratio or some kind of an estimate of what the direct benefit would be, say, in dollars, and what the indirect benefit would be based on your experience, say, or the experience of some of the states who have been doing this for a while, like Louisiana?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that figure off the top of my head. We have a full report that our office has prepared that, at a later time I could get you, those statistics.
That would be very helpful. I didn't even put that on the side.
No, that's okay.
I was just wondering if you had kind of even a ratio, kind of a sense in terms of X dollars of investment produces Y dollars in benefit. That's what I was looking at. Your experience.
Yeah, I know that, I believe that there is. I mean, there have been different studies to try to nail that down. Some of them conflict, and I want to, before I give you an answer on that, I'd like to, sort of.
If you could pass that information on, that would be extremely helpful, because we're all very supportive, and this is a very important issue for us. And we just want to make sure that we know to some extent what the risk and what the benefits of this kind of an effort.
I think that's wise, and we'd be happy to pass that on to the committee.
Thank you
We
very
will.
much. Thank you for your time.
Sure, pleasure.
Representative Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming here today. And hopefully after today, you'll refer lots of business to us in Connecticut. We had some discussion earlier about whether this type of endeavor should be under the focus of tourism or economic development. And I gather you regularly have contact in other states. Who do you contact in other states? Do the other states look at it as a tourism aspect, or do they look at it as an economic development initiative or both?
Well, I mean, the states that have implemented this have film offices that, such as the one that you're creating. And that will be the central focus to producers and the nuts and bolts sort of, aspect of bringing, films here. The unique part, when you get into the tourism, the unique part of some of the endeavors like Utopia is that you have that added dimension of tourism. So when you combine movies with tourism, you can see that that's worked obviously in California, and that's where some of the concerns that are brought in as using Connecticut as maybe just a one movie shoot, or a movie that you can refer here or there for a set, where you have an infrastructure where they're spending significant money to create tourism as a business and combine that with movie making. I think that's where you get the crossover.
So from your perspective, it would be wise then to have tourism very closely linked, not necessarily have that office under a tourism office, working in tandem with the tourism offices.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your testimony.
It's our pleasure.
Public official session, I'd like to have Secretary of State Susan Bison, please, for some comments.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's great to be here to testify in favor of the tax incentives for the film industry legislation, and I commend you for bringing it forward. I just wanted to share with you one aspect of this bill that I think has not been touched on yet, and it's this. We have over half of the young people that go to school outside of the state of Connecticut and never come back because of lack of job opportunities. And I wanted to share a story of a constituent of Senator LeBeau's and mine, a lady from South Windsor whose son will be graduating from film school in New York this year, and she was lamenting to me that he would never, ever come back to Connecticut. He was already making plans to go out to California. And it made me think of all the work that this committee and others have been doing to bring the film industry to Connecticut. There are so many young people, both in the construction fields, in the arts field, from Connecticut who are very talented, who deserve this tremendous opportunity. And I want to encourage the committee to bring this legislation forward, because I think Connecticut not only is blessed with many, many talented people, but also there are so many synergies. We have Sonolus and Waterford. We have beautiful, beautiful scenery in our state, and it would be a natural. Some questions have been asked about incentives for other states like Louisiana. Well, I think about Iowa, who is in the process of stealing our insurance industry from Connecticut bit by bit. Our companies from Connecticut have been going to Iowa, and it's because that state has been making a tremendous effort to appeal to particular industries. So we really have to be aggressive in Connecticut. We could provide a wonderful place on the East Coast for the film industry, and we should be out there aggressively fighting to bring that industry, because there are other states that are fighting to take away the industry that has traditionally been in our state. And so we need to be thinking outside the box, thinking about new industry and new places for the very, very talented young people that we have who are at the brink of leaving our state and going elsewhere. So I wanted to share that with you today, along with my support and my willingness to work on behalf of this legislation. Thank you so much.
And again, you touch on the important point again of the insource of job growth in the state of Connecticut, the business component of this bill. Not only the glitz, the glam, but the business component of it. You know, thank you for that reinforcement and comment. Any questions? Thank you, Madam
Thanks so
Secretary.
much.
Heidi Hamilton.
Good morning, Senator LeBeau, Representative Berger, Senator Cook, Representative Nojim, and Senator Stillman. My name is Heidi Hamilton, and I am the Film Division Director of the Commission on Culture and Tourism. I am pleased to be testifying on behalf of the Commission on House Bill 5797, an act concerning digital media and motion picture development in the state. The committee has copies of the testimony from the Commission's Executive Director, Jennifer Anaskovich, who could not be here today due to a long-standing family commitment out of the country. In the interest of time, I'd like to summarize the key points of that testimony. It's an accepted fact that large studio productions are supported by tax credits available in a majority of the states. The reality is that out-of-state studios in the pre-production phase routinely factor in tax credits that account for 7 to 9% of their total production budget. The industry will gravitate to the location with the best incentives. Accordingly, states rightfully hope to trade tax revenue for jobs and sustainable economic activity. To do this, however, the tax incentive legislation must be carefully targeted to maximize the intended benefits. There are areas of the bill that are problematic that we think do not target the intended benefits. For example, 5797 proposes competitive production credits of 25% and 30%. However, the bill's threshold of $50,000, which allows for unlimited creative content and pre-production activity, is, generally speaking, supporting riskier and speculative aspects of the industry. A more targeted approach is to create a commercial production credit. This credit will serve to encourage the retention of an industry whose continued growth can provide stability to a cyclical industry. New York is currently considering a commercial production credit. In Georgia, they also have a commercial production credit, and they add uplifts, so to speak, to multiple productions that come into the state to shoot commercials. And so that production company earns additional credits the more productions that they shoot. The bill's language does not include a star exception, meaning that a salary for the headliner talent as well as the director is included in calculating the credit. This can serve to balloon a tax credit, especially in the legislation which is before us that contains no caps on this or other proposed credits. In the absence of caps, Connecticut will be unable to control or even estimate the bill's fiscal impact. House Bill 5797 proposes an investor tax credit for reinvestments of revenue from a qualified production. It is unclear how this credit would be taken or how the state would ensure that the funding to be invested was actually derived from a qualified production. The proposed wage tax credit for productions in which 100% of the employees are Connecticut residents appears to suggest a 50% credit against employment taxes. While some states do include a wage credit provision, this portion of the bill appears to violate the Commerce Clause of the Constitution because of the requirement that 100% of the employees reside in Connecticut. Moreover, by including wages in both the calculation of production and wage credit, a production might qualify for a credit totaling 80%. What might be considered or added to the wage credit provision is a mechanism linking the credit to the training and development of Connecticut's labor force. It's not enough to penalize non-resident labor when the ultimate goal is to increase employment opportunities for residents. For example, Manitoba, Canada has a labor credit based on the use of Manitoba labor. However, in those instances where non-Manitoban labor is used, a production is still eligible to take the credit if it provides an on-site training opportunity for Manitoban labor. We see these kinds of apprentice programs in the construction industry, and they might very well work here. The new bureaucracy. The creation of yet another commission housed within CCT, but with no oversight by the Connecticut Commission on Tourism, is problematic and impacts the economic synergies that presently exist within the agency. For example, New Jersey has already started incorporating soprano shoots in tourism in New Jersey. The definitions of qualified productions and eligible development and production costs are much broader than those used in other states. These broad definitions could lead to runaway losses for the state. For example, the inclusion of trailers, video teasers, and demos created primarily for securing investment is the most disturbing because it unnecessarily expands the definition of pre-production expenses. Such expenses should not be state-financed, but rightfully borne by the investor that is willing to take the initial step to support a concept that may not result in a final production. Connecticut stands to gain jobs and generate economic growth if it adopts competitive tax incentives for film production. Incentives should be carefully calculated to achieve specific benefits. We need to minimize the loss of valuable state tax revenue while building a sustainable infrastructure that will support both indigenous productions and out-of-state revenue-generating productions. House Bill 5797 is a step towards much-needed incentives. Incentives must be easy to calculate, simple to use, and designed to sustain economic growth. We are happy to work with the legislator to achieve these objectives.